Good afternoon. Welcome to Long Live Third Parties Podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., a third parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bichard. Greetings, Dave. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
This is Andrew. Welcome to the podcast.
Okay, nice to meet you. Greetings from New York City, where you can hear the sirens in the background.
Oh no.
They're subsiding. Good. Great. Well, thanks for this opportunity to go out on the air, or whatever it is.
Yeah, we're glad to have you today. Friends, today we have the Freedom Socialist Party speaking to us. We have a Dave Schmauch. Is that how you pronounce the name?
That's good enough, Schmauch. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So let's get started by giving an introduction to yourself and how your life led you to the Freedom Socialist Party.
Well, that's a great question. I kind of grew up in a liberal household, I would say, kind of a peacenik household, and vaguely religious at that. And I moved to New York City in 1987 and went to, but wasn't connected to any particular organization. Went to anti-war things and, the usual demonstrations. And at some point during the Clinton administration, I became so sick of the situation with Iraq and the incessant and endless bombings of Iraq that I was moved to join the International Socialist Organization, which I stayed with for a few years. And I left the ISO, and probably more than 15 years ago, I joined the Freedom Socialist Party because I was drawn to its program, both of socialist feminism and one of our theoretical contributions to the Marxist tradition, which we call revolutionary integration. And that is, well, we can talk about that a little bit when we get to it. So does that tell you enough about me?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good background. So kindly explain history of the Freedom Socialist Party.
Well, let's see. How far do we go back? The Freedom Socialist Party has its roots in the, it goes back to the early and mid 60s as a party, but the roots are directly, come from the Marxist tradition through the Russian Revolution and the contributions of Leon Trotsky and influence the United States through the Socialist Workers' Party, which was founded in 1938. And as you probably know from your third party podcast, has many different branches. In other words, from 1938, there's been a series of splits, and that is different groups trying to get the ideas right that everybody at one point agreed on, but things happen and people have different ideas, contributions, and therefore different organizations come about. And the Freedom Socialist Party came about in the early 60s, largely because of the upsurge during the civil rights movement and what other socialist parties, including the SWP, in particular the SWP, Freedom Socialist Party, comes from, the position that the SWP was taking with regard to Black liberation, liberation of Black people, and whether it was going to be, whether it was going to be a policy of following one or another Black leader, or if it was going to be figuring out what history said would be the correct, history and circumstances said would be the right path forward, or if it was going to be an orientation towards separatism or integration. And our contribution was to actually break with the SWP on this question, and then provide for the world this grounding of the question in what we call revolutionary integration, which is a thorough really a thorough working out of the history and the circumstances of Black liberation, and clearly coming down on the side of the conclusion that in the United States, which is a special situation in the.
So you were saying the United States, because of the United States position in the world?
The United States position in the world. I'm sorry, back up a little more. I'm not quite sure where I was.
Okay, history of the Freedom Socialist Party. You're talking about the civil rights movement in the 60s, and then you were mentioning how something
Right.
about your position in the
Right.
world.
Well, the civil rights, the Freedom Socialist Party comes out of the time of the civil rights movement in the 60s, and we split with the Socialist Workers' Party over the question of how Black liberation was going to be achieved in this country, and our contribution to this question is a theory called revolutionary integration, which was worked out in two separate documents, one in 1963 and one in 1982. And this was a thoroughly researched and thought about study as to whether Black people, number one, were a nation that should separate, which was, as you know, a minority opinion within the Black community at very in this country's history, or whether integration was the primary thrust of history of Black Americans in this country. So I think what I was saying was that that's one of our major contributions to world Marxism, actually, as it pertains to the American situation, which is unique in its own way in terms of the liberation of people of color. But I also wanted to say that our other contribution is that of socialist feminism, and we are the only party in this country which considers itself, or has called itself from the beginning, socialist feminist. We have elevated to a programmatic level the necessity of women's leadership, working class women's leadership, if there's going to be a successful socialist revolution. And this is quite different from, the feminism that people eschew, or especially people on the left put aside as being invalid, and that is, they call it bourgeois feminism or whatever, of Gloria Steinem and Hillary Clinton and whoever else gets put into the forefront of, look, see what women can do, or Kamala Harris as one of the latest examples. If he can do it, everybody can do it. Well, that's a lot different than what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that in the forefront of every upsurge for democratic rights, basic democratic rights around the world, women are at the forefront of these struggles, and that's what we call feminism, that's incorporated into socialist feminist. There cannot be anything else is utopian. In other words, all of the things that have gone before that were all led by men, that's not going to liberate women, just as, class has to liberate itself. Women have to be in the forefront of any revolutionary. That's what socialist feminism is, the fact that they are.
That gives us a good background of your party. So kindly expand upon what the history gave to the party as to what your platform entails.
Well, our platform, you're using electoral language now, which is very interesting. I'll give you a little history of what we do and how we orient towards elections. We think it's very important, since most people understand the electoral arena to be where change happens, or at least that's the idea, that change happens in the electoral arena. We know that that's unfortunately, but instead of abstaining as a very small socialist party from the electoral arena. We not only encourage people to vote for socialists, which we did in the last election. We encouraged people, we suggested that if they cast a vote at all presidential election, that they cast it for the Socialist Action candidate, whose name was Jeff Mackler at that, as opposed to and we also support other third-party candidates as long as they are anti-capitalist socialist candidates, and their program doesn't veer in any egregious way with a socialist, internationalist, anti-capitalist program. So just to say that there was a candidate a few years ago for New York, and she was running as the Party of Socialism and Liberation candidate, and we supported her campaign. That being said, I'll tell you that we in 2012 ran what we called an unmillionaire campaign. We ran our own Stephen Durham and Christina Lopez for president and vice president. And we do this as a way to get out and talk about the electoral process with people in the street. We don't necessarily have illusions of winning the presidency, because if we did, that would present a whole bunch of different problems, wouldn't it? But we get out there because it's where people are, it's what they're thinking about, and it's an opportunity to talk about socialist feminism and the role of elections and what democracy would really look like, and so on and so forth. One other thing I'll tell you about is a 2005 campaign we ran in Seattle, which is where we actually have a majority of our members at this point. And our own Linda Averill, who's a public employee, a transportation employee, bus driver, ran for the city council of Seattle in 2005, and she got 18% of the vote, which included endorsements from several labor organizations and people in Seattle who thought her platform, which is what you asked me about, was something that they could support. And back then, if I remember correctly, one of her planks was, of course, tax the rich, because Seattle is the home of Boeing and, I don't know, is it Microsoft or some other heavy hitters? And we all know that they don't pay their fair amount of taxes. And Linda was talking about how things could be different if they were made to pay their taxes. So tax the rich was one. She also had, way back then in 2005, she had a plank in her platform for $17 minimum wage. And she was also talking about the necessity of rent control for working people, because rents have been, as they are in most urban areas, rents have been a terrible burden on working class people who aren't, as we know, $17 an hour. So that's a little bit of the platform that Linda ran on, and that Stephen and Christina ran on in the presidential campaign in 2012. Just one more thing is that in our newspaper, the Freedom Socialist, which comes out every 2 months and is available at socialism.com, and you can got that URL if you want.
Sure, yeah, that'll be interesting. How did you get it?
Get in early and often. That's it. There's no trick to it. But just this issue of our paper, almost every issue of our paper, there's something we call our 10-point program for working class survival, or Robin Hood program. And that kind of lays out what we're about, from internationalism to taxing the rich to women's rights and so on and so on.
So you've touched on this some in our conversation, how you differentiate between yourself and other socialist or communist parties out there. You mentioned the split from the SWP, and it seems like maybe your emphasis on feminism would be part of it. How would you describe how you differ from other socialist or communist parties?
Right. Well, as I said before, the real programmatic differences, or the most important ones, are both our our theoretical contribution on revolutionary integration. So that is the importance of Black leadership towards an American socialist revolution in the United States, and then also quite similarly, the importance of women's leadership for the same purpose, for the liberation of women and the liberation of the world. Because when women and people of color fight for their rights, they fight for everybody. They pull everybody along for, I hope, fairly obvious reasons, the positions they have in society. Now, you asked me about other socialist organizations. I don't want to speak too much for or against other socialist organizations. We do have some differences, and we actually give critical support when we endorse a candidate, as I said we did in the last presidential election. There are some things that we probably don't agree with. Some of them are national, some of them are international. In other words, what one socialist party might say about Assad or about Cuba or about any other number of things happening in the world might not be the same thing that we would say. As far as you mentioned, socialism and communism or communists. Now, the Communist Party in the United States was founded in 1919, right after the Russian Revolution, and has a very interesting, illustrious, and I would say checkered history. So you have, for instance, all of the examples of labor struggles that were supported by the Communist Party of the USA, or even more importantly, something like the Scottsboro trial in the 30s, which was really headed by the Communist Party and lawyers that they provided for the trial, which basically saved the lives of the so-called Scottsboro boys. However, during World War II, a major change took place with the Communist Party, and it basically hitched its wagon to the Soviet Union for all intents and purposes. And because of, we can talk about all kinds of things, because of popular frontism, which was in a sense a combination of a coalescing of liberal forces in this country, communists, labor forces, some cultural forces and political forces, where common cause was made with the Soviet Union, and the Communist Party of the USA at that point didn't allow any criticism of the Soviet Union, which at that point had been consolidated, as we know, under the leadership of Stalin. There were the trials of all the old Bolsheviks who were all assassinated in the late 30s. Then there's World War II, and the idea was that we cannot criticize the Soviet Union because we need to make common cause to defeat fascism. That being said, since that time, the Communist Party lost its revolutionary essence, whatever it had, and has, since the presidency of Franklin, encouraged all of their members and everybody through their public Democratic Party candidates, which is something that we completely disagree with. So I hope that tells you a little something about the difference between us and some other parties or tendencies or political trends in the U.S.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely a good overview of that. I have a follow-up to that, since you mentioned the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you view the Democratic Party, especially given that there's a so-called progressive element these days? How do you perceive the Democratic Party from the viewpoint of your party?
Well, the Democratic Party is just like the Republican Party, bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical companies, the health insurance lobby, which is why we cannot get a universal health care bill passed, and also why we can't get $15 national minimum wage passed. And it's also for by the military interests, so that even under the presidency of Joe Biden, you'll see that 700 odd billion dollars, I think it was close to 800 billion odd dollars for the military budget wasn't enough. They needed to give another 30 billion. Nobody can even comprehend these huge numbers, much less actually understand what that money could do if it were put to human purposes. I think people can sort of imagine, but this has gone on so long that it's almost beyond comprehension. The military's always been with us, and it always will be, and so on and so forth. But the two parties, how I see the Democratic Party, the Republican Party is the party that's owned and bought by all of those interests, and the Democrats are owned by the same interests, but they will kind of say, we feel your pain, and they will allow some dog and pony charades to go on, for instance, with Bernie Sanders and DSA entering. However, when it looks like they just might get something done, all of the forces of the Democratic machine come down on them, come to bear. As we saw in two conventions, they iced out Bernie Sanders and his followers. And then Bernie's role was to wave his finger at everybody the last time and say, no, 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 we made a deal. If I wasn't the candidate, you would vote for Hillary Clinton. And this time he said, no, 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 we made a deal, and wagged his finger at everybody and said, no, you have to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I don't think that, as you say, progressive elements are going to make much headway in the Democratic Party. And that being said, I really think that it's incumbent upon people like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and anybody else you might care to name, to completely separate themselves from the Democratic Party and run as independents. They need to start or participate in some kind of labor party, organizing with labor, which desperately needs to be supported and rebuilt in this country. It was a great day when the teachers went on strike in West Virginia. You never know where these things are going to flare up. And yet, in the end, what happens? Everybody's encouraged to vote for Democratic candidates who, when they get elected, say, okay, we got this now. There's no need to stay in the streets or cause any trouble. You can all go back home now. We got it, and we'll take care of it, which they never do. And what the actual trend is over the past several decades is they can completely take any progressive vote for granted, because they can always point to the other guy and say, look how bad he is. Look how bad Trump is. You can't possibly vote for him. You have to vote for us. And this is the lesser evil argument, and it has worked to a point. But the consequence is that there's been this complete rightward movement of the Democratic Party, so that they don't have to make any promises at all or actually get anything progressive done. And that's where we are today. And I'm not in the business of making predictions, but it's quite possible that because of this back and forth that we experience between the Republicans and the Democrats, but with the Democrats moving increasingly rightward, that we could very likely get somebody even worse than Trump in the next election, because people are just absolutely fed up with the fact that so many promises are made, or no promises are even made, and things don't change. So that's just a little bit about the Democratic Party. We tell people that there's no wisdom in trying to be an insurgency inside a party that's completely beholden to corporate interests. And actually, I mean, look at the most recent example. So Nina Turner wants to, is it Cincinnati? Correct me if I'm wrong, Cincinnati, Ohio? Nina Turner is running for a seat in the House of Representatives in Cincinnati. All of the traditional Democratic Party machine forces are coming down hard to oppose her and support another woman of color who is a traditional Democratic Party who they think they can keep in line and who won't cause too much trouble. Nina Turner, of course, is someone from the Bernie Sanders campaign, and they're just a little bit afraid that she might get something done. And they are so beholden to the status quo and the idea that real change cannot happen because it would shake up the seats that they sit on, that they actually come down, as they did with Bernie, as they do with whoever, and they will support somebody who isn't even, centrist. They support people who are actually pretty darn right wing. I mean, how can you? You'll have to stop me. How can a party is having any cohesiveness when there are people like Joe Manchin in it, or even people like Nancy Pelosi? A lot of talk, somebody who has a personal fortune of $100 million has no idea what ordinary people are going through on a daily basis, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I don't think the Democratic Party is reformable. I don't think that the insurgent so-called forces are going to get very far, and I would certainly never encourage anybody to vote for them. How's that?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Alrighty.
That sounds good. Yeah, we don't want people voting for the Democratic Party.
Well, and that's why we need, yes, and your whole thing is about third parties, is it not?
Exactly.
And that's why we participate in the electoral arena, either suggesting, a choice, an internationalist, one with an internationalist perspective or program, because you cannot find a mainstream candidate on the ballot who is not an America First candidate. It's always America First. It's always, we have to have a bigger economy than China. It's always our military has to be number one. It's always buy American, and so on. So we want to offer people the opportunity to vote for something that is, internationalist, looking towards a human society, which would be based instead of on competition, which it is at all levels, and it's breaking down, instead on international cooperation. That's it in a nutshell. It's about either we're going to have a world system that cooperates to save the possibility of human life on this planet, or we're not. And capitalism is not going to, there's no possibility in my mind capitalism in any way is going to be changed in any way to do what's necessary to keep the planet hospitable for future generations of human beings. I mean, I just see it going over a cliff, and it seems like every day there's something that just shows how rapidly this is happening. And the only way to slow it, stop it, reverse it, if it is possible, is through international, socialist cooperation. So it's going to be it's a massive task we have.
What recommendations do you have?
What book recommendations? Well, I can tell you that that the Freedom Socialist Party is going to have a study group, which will be available in person at our hall in Harlem, New York City, or by Zoom. And we're going to be starting that. I wish I could tell you exactly when, but you're socialism.com, and there'll be a link for the New York branch. You can give people my email address, or for that matter, my telephone number, and people can text me. And we're going to be doing a study group on our own book, which I recommend, which is called Revolutionary Integration, the two documents I talked about. It's called The Marxist Analysis of African American Liberation. And it does end in the 80s, so there's much more to talk about, coming up to the present time. It kind of ends with the Reagan reversals of a lot of things that had taken place in the mid 50s, 60s, and 70s. That's one book I would recommend. Another very entertaining and extremely informative book is a collection of very short pieces, which originally appeared mostly in our newspaper, the Freedom Socialist, by one of our founding members, and her name was Clara Fraser. She was from New York City. And it's called Revolution, She Wrote. And it covers all kinds of topics from basic Marxism philosophy to book reviews, film reviews, and just socialist feminism and socialism in general. Wonderful book. Revolution, She Wrote. I think all of these things are, well, they're available from our own imprimatur, which is Red Letter Press in Seattle. And there's a website for Red Letter Press, and we have books on all kinds of other things, including some pamphlets, on the life of Leon Trotsky, some further afield things. There's one on Lyndon LaRouche, the meaning of LaRouche, which is extremely interesting, and other things that you'll find there. So those are my two recommendations: Revolutionary Integration, Revolution, She Wrote, both from Red Letter Press, available from Freedom Socialist Party.
Excellent.
How much time do we have left?
We got time to speak about what you want to speak about. I suppose as long as my cell phone the battery's still running, we can talk.
Okay, 3 or 4 minutes then, right? On current activities here in New York City.
Go for it.
Okay, so for the past 5 years, we comrades of the Freedom Socialist Party have been involved in a campaign, so to speak, for an elected civilian review board here in New York City. It might sound like something new. It is not. It is a continuation of a tradition of efforts that have taken place in several cities around the country to try to get some real police accountability, which has never really been a reality. It's always been about policing themselves, and then once in a while something really blows up, whether it's Rodney King or Amadou Diallo or George Floyd, and then all of the forces of officialdom come out of the haystack and say, oh, we really need to do something. There must be some racist behavior on the part of the police or whatever. Something that everybody knows and something they don't really want to change, but they have to make a good showing of it. So what we have in New York City is something called the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is an elected board which takes complaints about the police officers and has a very poor record of doing anything. And the big part of that is because they only have the power to make recommendations. The police commissioner in New York City actually has the final say about what's going to happen in any given case involving police accountability. So we, following many efforts historically through the decades around the country, started 5 years ago something we called an elected civilian review board, which is based on that civilian complaint review board. However, it's game changing in the sense that it provides for 3 major changes. Number one is that the board would be elected, not appointed, would be elected from the city council district here in New York, 20-some people total. A little bit of extra weight given to districts with the most complaints against the police, and not appointed. Number two is that it is empowered to make decisions that are binding, and this is of course contentious because it necessarily takes power away from the police commissioner and puts it in the hands of this elected board. So we've done a lot of homework. I said we've been working for 5 years on this, and we think we know our stuff as well as any legal people. But as you know, all of these things that are contentious end up in court anyway and need to be adjudicated. So we'll see where that goes. And the third part of our legislation provides for an independent prosecutor for criminal cases. now the district attorney in New York City is in charge of those criminal cases, and they take too long. They often don't reach the desired result in the eyes of the community. And the police, the DA has a long history of working very closely with the police department. So we've provided for an independent prosecutor for criminal cases. And lastly, I'll just tell you that this has, after 5 years, our campaign for an elected civilian review board has morphed into, or has become, an actual bill, which is sitting in the city council now and is going to be debated and so forth. And it's complicated because certain people term out, people who are supporting it are terming out, and we need more people to pick it up and support it. There are 51 city council members in New York. We'd like them all to support it, but we know that's probably not going to happen unless there's a fantastic upsurge in what goes on in the city at large, or the world at large. So we have a lot of work to do, and it is City Council Bill 2245, and everybody should know about it. It's called the Community Power Act. It provides for these 3 points that I mentioned: for an elected, empowered review board for police accountability with a independent prosecutor. And the Community Power Act is bill number 2245, New York City Council, and we're going to do everything we can to promote it and get people to support it.
So listeners out there, if they want to help getting this bill passed, should they contact the city council in New York if they live there, or maybe they don't live there?
They should actually get involved with the Community Power Act, the campaign for an elected civilian review board, which you'll find on Facebook. There's a nice Facebook page. I think you could just Google campaign for an elected civilian review board, New York City, and you would get there. There's also a website, Stop Police Violence NYC, and people can we do need contributions for the Community Power Act. Most of it goes to administrative help we get, just keeping the lists up to date, making sure people know what's going on and are updated. And we also have to print materials. We're very low budget operation, but if people can even donate $5 a month through one of those services, the Venmo or whatever it is, we very much appreciate that. We need to print up brochures. We have posters that we take to various public demonstrations and press conferences, and everything costs something. So that would be very helpful if you put the word out. So it's Community Power Act or Elected Civilian Review Board, New York City, and Stop Police Violence NYC. One way or another, people will find it. There was a huge upsurge for 1 month during the George Floyd protests, where people found on GoFundMe, and that was really great. It's just the potential is, if that type of enthusiasm and support and outrage, quite frankly, could be sustained. Unfortunately, it normally, as things go, dissipates, and the Democratic Party candidates have a lot of Democratic Party politicians have a lot of responsibility for that. As I said before, they always put themselves in a position to say, okay, we got this, you can all go home now. And the only way for these things to be sustained, as you and I know, is for people to stay in the streets.
Sounds great.
Sounds great. Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
We're glad to have you on. We wish you all the best in that campaign you just talked about, as well as all your other endeavors.
Thank you, and the same to you. Anybody who hears this wants to come to our study group for revolutionary integration. or anything else. Thanks a lot,
Yes.
Andrew.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too.